like and how they would reflect on these events 10 years from now. They couldn't get out of this time. And in preparation for tonight, I thought about that moment because we at Temple Bethel have had Dr. Kat speak along with others on the topic of human trafficking. We've had speakers, police, advocates, but those who have been through and survived, the details of that time of trafficking are so painful to articulate. Sometimes it's just impossible. In the same way, these seniors in a much less severe physical problem, but a much stronger, compelling, couldn't get out of their heads in this time. So too, someone who has been through trauma, something difficult, it is hard to articulate. If you've ever talked to a Holocaust survivor who glosses over parts of the story that is too painful to remember, or I have a friend who is a secret agent in the Mossad who just cannot talk about certain periods of his life, those who've gone through human trafficking have a way of creating emptiness around the space of their worst moments, the space where you can't even articulate the pain and the hurt and the emptiness. How can we as Jews resonate with that? Turn to Torah and look at Pharaoh. Look at the pain of trauma of slavery on the Jewish people thousands of years ago that pushes on us. And let's us ask ourselves, how does Torah gloss over the 400 years of slavery until the birth of Moses? Only when Moses is born and grows can God say, go to Pharaoh. The time before Moses born, a time of abuse, of pain, of hurt for the Jewish people, is a time of emptiness. One of the names for God is Ein Sof, without end. But the concept of Ein Sof also implies an emptiness, that there is nothing there. And sometimes it is in the nothingness, even in the most painful and difficult and most greatest absence of God's presence, that even there, God is there. Where is God? God is in the emptiness when we rush in to fill the emptiness, when through action and acts, when through events like tonight and conversations and people like Dr. Kat, who help us understand the pain of the most difficult times we could imagine in someone's life, they pull us into that emptiness, into that void, and they create a space. They create a space in the heaviness. They create a space to remind us how incidents like human trafficking can stay in family and break cycles and destroy generations and pass on trauma. And so with the void of emptiness, of heaviness in the heart, we rush in on this night to fill that void, to fill that emptiness. Like Moses, who would go to Pharaoh and plead on behalf of the Jewish people who were too pained and empty from the suffering of slavery, so too we must be modern day Moseses, and we will listen to two tonight, and we must rush into that void and fill it with compassion and love. And in that task, I wish everyone chazak va'amatz, courage and strength. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Mates. It is my pleasure to now introduce Helene Paul, Chair of our Jewish Community Relations Council.
Good evening and welcome. I am Helene Paul, the Chair of our Jewish Community Relations Council. Our JCRC is the public policy, community relations, and advocacy arm of the Jewish Federation of South Palm Beach County. The JCRC's mission is to unite, support, and direct organized Jewish community. Human trafficking, whether labor or sex, is a human tragedy. Our Jewish values implore us to hold sacred and respect, responsibility, fairness, caring, community, and kindness. Human trafficking assaults each and every one of our Jewish values. And so it's with the utmost respect and gratitude that I welcome our next two speakers. State Attorney Dave Aronberg has made the fight against human trafficking a top priority in Palm Beach County. We are one of the few communities that has a human trafficking task force that brings together federal, state, and local law enforcement to proactively investigate individuals who attempt to recruit others into the life of a modern-day slave. The task force, funded by a federal grant, is located in Palm Beach Gardens. Dave Aronberg and his dedicated prosecutors and support staff of his Special Victims Unit are leaders in battling human trafficking, which is why the Florida Attorney General appointed Dave Aronberg as the only state attorney to serve on the statewide Council on Human Trafficking. And Dr. Katrina Rosenblatt is an author, federal consultant, trainer, speaker, and international survivor leader, as well as the executive director of There Is Hope for Me, Inc., a survivor-to-survivor peer mentoring anti-human trafficking agency working in Florida and in California. Dr. Kat has overcome human trafficking and abuse from the time she was just 13 years old to the age of 17. She has worked closely with the FBI. In 2019, she received a Medal of Honor for bravery from them. Dr. Kat has spoken and consulted nationwide, and she has written 2 books on human trafficking: Trafficking in America, the most undetected human rights violation of our time, and her memoir, Stolen. So now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Dave Berenberg.
Oh, there you go. Hello there, everyone. I'm honored to be part of this. I am the state attorney for Palm Beach County, and I have been at this role since 2012, and I've been elected now 3 times. But when I get asked about issues facing our criminal justice system here in Palm Beach County, the number 1 and number 2 issues I get asked are about our Sober Homes Task Force going after the opioid epidemic and about human trafficking, because actually both play into each other. You're talking about a vulnerable population that is exploited by bad actors, whether they're people who are facing substance use disorder or people who are lured into our community to be sold into slavery. And that's what human trafficking is. It is modern day slavery. It is exploitation. And there are now more slaves today than there ever have been in the history of the world. So when you think this is a problem that is on the wane, it is the opposite. And most human trafficking is actually labor trafficking. Most human trafficking is when people are forced into labor. But most cases that we see of human trafficking that we prosecute are sex trafficking cases. And that's because we are doing a much better job when it comes to rooting out sex trafficking than we are with labor trafficking. We are doing a much better job in getting the victims to speak up and speak out. We're doing a much better job when it comes to showing people what the telltale signs of sex trafficking are. When people see something, they say something. When it comes to labor trafficking, it's not as successful. Victims often are foreign born. They often come from a place where police are not their friends and they are afraid to speak up. So it's incumbent upon all of us to come together to know the signs of human trafficking, whether it's sex trafficking or labor trafficking, because we are at the front lines. There are only about 850,000 law enforcement officials in this country of 320 million people. And so we depend upon each and every one of us to be on the front lines of this, to be our eyes and ears, because human trafficking is modern day slavery in plain sight. It is hiding in plain sight. It's when you go to your nail salon and there's a woman who is not allowed to handle the cash, who works there, who is sleeping in the back room and is afraid to look at you in the eye. Those are telltale signs of trafficking. And it's the young student in school, the 16-year-old girl who shows up to high school with a new older boyfriend who buys her expensive jewelry and has his name tattooed on her eyelids. That's an actual case that we had of human trafficking. And so we can come together and help eradicate this in our community and help make our community the safest it could possibly be. But it takes all of us together. Our office is doing its part. As state attorney, we have a task force that we work with Sheriff Bradshaw and federal and state and local officials, where we come together in a unit in Palm Beach Gardens where we go onto the internet and we help root out trafficking before there's a victim. And with a federal grant, we have this innovative task force that has had 160 plus, 180, over 180 investigations since it started in 2016, with around 50 different arrests. And we have very tough laws in Florida where we can really put the hammer to people who are engaged in this practice. We can get them life felonies if they engage in sex trafficking with a minor. We can get them first-degree felonies if they engage in labor trafficking. And so we're using these very tough statutes, but at the same time, Florida, believe it or not, is actually progressive when it comes to how we're dealing with this problem, because if you are a victim of human trafficking, you are eligible to have your low-level crimes expunged, meaning that if you were arrested for prostitution or drug possession, and we can prove that you were a victim yourself of human trafficking, you can get your crimes expunged from the record and start a new life. If you are here illegally, you in a victim of human trafficking, we can get you a federal visa. Even at the federal level, there's a special visa called a T visa that is eligible for people who are victims of human trafficking. But this does not exist until the victim speaks up and speaks out. This does not exist until law enforcement can help identify a victim. So we need you on the front lines with us. And before I bring in our special guest, just a couple more things about this. People are confused sometimes about the difference between human trafficking and smuggling. Smuggling involves transportation. Human trafficking involves exploitation. So when you hear people say, hey, we've got to stop the human trafficking at the southern border where you have people, women abducted and tied up with ropes and duct tape, that is more Hollywood than reality. What is reality is the luring of individuals into our community under false pretenses. It's the exploitation rather than the transportation. And then they are led into a life of forced sex or forced labor. And so what we've done here is we have our task force, which has been recognized at the state and national level for success. And that's why I was appointed to be the one state attorney in the state to be on the Attorney General's Commission on Human Trafficking. But also, in addition to the task force, we have new laws in Florida that give us new powers. For example, we now have the creation of a database of people convicted of soliciting prostitution. So we have this, like, instead of just a sex offender database, the new law that just passed in Florida gives us a database of people who are engaged in human trafficking. That's a plus. We also have new requirements on the operation of massage parlors and strip clubs and hotels, places where human trafficking flourish. And perhaps most importantly, Florida is now the first state in the country that has required mandatory education, K through 12, on child trafficking. And it's something that could have really helped in the case of Katrina Rosenblatt. Katrina Rosenblatt and I grew up in the same neighborhood in North Miami, Florida. But she was lured into this life of sex trafficking because she became a victim because there was no education in K through 12 about it. There was no say something when you see something. There were no task forces. There were no laws at the federal and state level that were designed to help victims, to prevent them from becoming victims in the first place. And so I want to bring in Dr. Katariina Rosenblatt, who has turned her story, her experiences, into ways that she can help others to prevent other people from being victims. She has done amazing work, and we're so fortunate to have her as our guest here today. And I want to bring in Dr. Katariina and let her tell her story, and then we'll ask some questions of her. So Dr. Kat, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, State Attorney Aronberg. I just call you Dave. He's like my big brother, honestly. That's how I feel. My heart is just overwhelmed with gratitude right now because of Dave Berenberg, because of the Federation, you know, as Dave mentioned, and thank you also to Rabbi Jessica, who had such a warm heart towards me when I spoke at the Seder there, and the Jewish community. But I really want to emphasize, gratitude towards Dave, and congratulations once again on your reelection. Unopposed, I believe. So, can't get better than that. Yeah, just have to, give credit where credit is due. And as Dave said, we're here today to talk about how trafficking has impacted us. And so he shared that we grew up in the same neighborhood. We grew up in the same Jewish community. And this is a family. I mean, the Jewish community really is a family. It's looking out for one another, training your children and how they should go, and hoping that when they're older, they're not going to depart from it. But as Dave also mentioned, trafficking is a crime that involves a victim, and children are targeted at every socioeconomic level. He also mentioned about labor trafficking, and this is something, Dave, you may not know, so I'm just going to share it because my daughter, Diana, who you do know, was a victim of labor trafficking in Broward County. And I just felt compelled to share that because people listening may not be aware how easy it is for young people to get lured in. And as Rabbi Jessica talked about the generational trauma, well, I came from a single parent home. I was recruited through false friends, and I wound up getting raped and experiencing sex trafficking. I did not get paid for the use of my body. Instead, I got paid with trauma. Fortunately for my daughter, she did not get sex trafficked, but how it looked like for her. And I'm so glad you brought that point up, Dave, about the labor trafficking, because that is becoming more prevalent, especially with the COVID pandemic. What happened to my daughter in Broward County, just as you all said, Helene and Marissa and Rabbi Jessica, talking about the vulnerability, a 16-year-old and getting lured in for sex. The same thing happened for Diana, that she got lured in for a job at the mall. And I'm just gonna leave it at this, saying she worked for 6 weeks without a single paycheck. And that's when I stepped in, having experienced exploitation. Exploitation is exploitation, no matter how you call it, sex, labor. It's somebody vulnerable being taken advantage of. Am I right, Dave?
Yes, and Dr. Kat, it's important to distinguish what is human trafficking and what is like prostitution and other crimes. Mm-hmm. Because when it comes to luring people into this life, it's about exploitation, as you say. When it's an adult, it involves force, fraud, or coercion. And that's the key. Yeah. What makes it human trafficking doesn't involve force, fraud, or coercion. And if any of those three things exist, then it becomes sex trafficking or labor trafficking. So if you force someone, but by force, fraud, or coercion into sex or labor trafficking, then that's the crime. But, and here's the important point for your daughter, Dr. Kat, is when it's an underage victim, when it's a juvenile, you don't need force, fraud, or coercion. Right. You don't need it. You just need someone who's brought in and put into the life of forced labor or forced sex, but you don't need actual force in it. You don't need fraud. You don't need coercion. So, for example, if you had someone who is telling his 16-year-old friend to send nude pictures out on the internet and charging for it, or getting her to dance in a strip club, that could be charged as sex trafficking, even though there was no force, fraud, or coercion. With your daughter, if your daughter was working in the mall and wasn't forced there, but they kept working her there and not paying her and exploited her, that could be labor trafficking. Because when it comes to underage individuals, you don't need force, fraud, or coercion. So back to you, Dr. Kat.
Thank you. That was a great explanation. And I'm so glad that we're on here together so we can go back and forth, having the top prosecutor in Palm Beach County explain the details of the prosecution and the laws, I think is vital for helping people to know what to look for. So I'll share the stories and then you can do, like you just did, the technical, which is great. So with my daughter's situation back a couple of years ago, we did call Polaris and we got the store shut down. Polaris is the National Human Trafficking Hotline. But of course, in Palm Beach, you have State Attorney Dave Aronberg and his task force who will go right out and shut down anybody. And I've seen them, in action, do their hard work, and they're hard at work, even in the pandemic. And so I also want to give a shout out and thanks to Lori Berman for all her work in bringing this awareness and bringing us all together today. But on a good note, for my daughter's situation, she wound up after 6 weeks no longer being exploited for labor trafficking. As Dave said, there wasn't a need to prove it. She did not need to testify. They went in and shut down that store in the mall in Broward County. Unfortunately, in my case, there was no such thing as a human trafficking law, a hotline, or a state attorney such as Dave Aronberg, or legislators like Lori Berman, who are fighting for this issue. And instead, I just had to survive. I'm thankful I have a wonderful mom that never gave up on me. And as we're talking about bringing the Jewish community together, I think it's very vital to talk about the family being the starting point. I did a TV interview today on Channel 12, which will air tomorrow, talking about our meeting tonight, and just really urged parents, get engaged in your child's life, know who they're talking to online, know who their friends are. And if your child is a minor, as Dave said, and they're having a relationship with an older man or an older woman, and they're buying them gifts, they're buying them stuff, that is definitely someone you do not want in your child's life. If they're not a relative, they're just somebody online or somebody they met through a friend. And that's where I'll go into a little bit of my story. How did I come to understand all of this? It's because I experienced it. At 13 years old, I first got recruited at a hotel in Miami Beach. And although that was very traumatic, being sold for my virginity for $550, the person who recruited me was an older girl named Mary, and she befriended me because I had low self-esteem, again, coming from a Jewish home where my dad was a businessman. Money was all he was concerned about. He didn't have time for me. He didn't have the capacity to show love to me in the way that a daughter needs. And so these false friends came into my life. They spotted the vulnerability, and Mary introduced me to her pimp, who said I could call him daddy. Now, I'm not going to give away the entire story, right? So you can buy the book, Stolen, but I do want to talk on the second story, which was the middle school experience that I had, because I think what State Attorney Aronberg, what Dave said, I'm just going to call him Dave, seriously, because he's like family. I hope you don't mind. What Dave said was so important about the schools finally getting educated on this. When I was 14 years old, after leaving the hotel and experiencing the recruitment, being drugged and left for dead, and again, you'll have to get the book to read the whole story, but my mom moved us, coming from a single parent home. She did the best she could. I wound up going to JFK Middle School, which I've gone back and talked to them directly, as well as NMB, which, as you know or may not know, Dave is an alumni there. And there were students that were being trafficked, had been trafficked again at JFK. And I talked to the school and I said, listen, when I went to school here, I got recruited through a friend in my history class in 7th grade. Her father was a trafficker and recruited young girls like myself who came from abusive backgrounds. They were looking specifically for kids with abuse in their backgrounds. So that's why it's got to start with the family in the Jewish community, bringing families together, providing healing opportunity and hope for them, through temples such as Temple Bethel. Again, I can't say enough about Rabbi Jessica and the wonderful work they do there. But that's where it starts, is the community coming together, building up strong families, so there isn't a gap for these exploiters to come in and falsify their friendship, mirroring a family like relationship. So in the second trafficking, as in the first, there was this idea of a family, of a father figure, my friend's dad. Okay, so he's safe because he's a dad. But you know what? He wasn't safe. He was a pedophile. And as Dave said, thank God now we have laws that will put these people away. And I'm so proud of you and so honored to be here with you, Dave, because of the amazing work you're doing. You are definitely one of my heroes, that they can get life in prison for trafficking minors. Fortunately for me, I escaped those situations, but not without a drug addiction, which I had to overcome. Did not have to go into a sober living home, which probably some of your sober living homes have trafficking survivors. But I was fortunate enough to have a family that eventually came around me and supported me. And I was able to get free from all of the addictions, all of the bad people, go back to school. And now I'm earning my JD so that I can one day become a prosecutor like Dave or a legislator like Lori. And that's my story in a nutshell. If you want to add something.
Dr. Kat, thank you for sharing with us. And I appreciate the nice words. Can you talk to us about what the state should be doing based on what you experienced? Because your experience is pretty typical. You were lured by someone who befriended you. She gave you jewelry and lured you into this life, and then you got stuck there. Actually, can you answer one question? I think a lot of people are wondering, why don't more victims just leave if they're not, there's no duct tape and rope? Can you go into what keeps a victim in the throes of this menace? And then can you talk about what should be done that we're not doing to help future victims?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dave. So let's put ourselves for a moment, guys, everyone, in your 13-year-old mind, okay? Try to remember what you were like, 13, 16. Your frontal lobe is not fully developed as a female until you're 24 and as a male until you're 29. No offense, Dave. But, you know, it's the fact, boys and girls are both recruited because at that age, we're not fully processing what's happening. Instead, we're going based on our emotions. And if I'm getting abused at home, or like I was, and if you have sexual abuse, verbal abuse, if you have any kind of even economic challenges coming from a single parent home, I apologize for the storm. It's really bad down here in Miami today. But if you're experiencing that at home, and then someone comes along like a knight in shining armor, or a friend, like I went to my friend's house for a sleepover, all of a sudden you've got two things going on. You've got a need being met, which is not a real need because they're not real relationships. They're false relationships that lure you in, create a trauma bond, and then they hook you into doing what they want with threats. A lot of times they'll threaten your family, like they threatened to kill my family. They knew where I lived, where I went to school, who my teachers were. So they do research and study their victims first. So there's a lot of this manipulation going on and a lot of fear. Sometimes they don't even need to hurt you, but you are aware because of what they've done to other girls. Some of the survivors we've helped, and There Is Hope for Me, have really been rescued. As Marissa mentioned, working with FBI, and Helene mentioned, we've seen kids rescued from traffickers where children have died. They actually have died. And so we come in just at the right moment. I'll share my story and someone will come and tell me, I'm living this. I'm experiencing this. Can you help me? Only to find out later, this dude killed 2 other kids because of drug abuse. Survivors die of suicide, self-inflicted, wounds, because it's just too difficult to take. So to answer your question, why do they stay? Such a good question when they're not physically bound, which sometimes they are chained or in cages in the most extreme cases, but there's an emotional chain. There's emotional manipulation. And at 16, 17, 15, it does not take a lot to convince you that this person has power over you, to harm you and your family, especially if you have younger siblings.
And Dr. Kat, along those lines, before I get to the second part of the question, isn't it true that most victims of sex trafficking are homegrown, that they are from the community? I think there's a belief that when it comes to human trafficking, most people are foreign born and they're shipped over here and they don't speak English. But when it comes to sex trafficking, most victims are from here. They're runaways. They're people who are dealing with very tough backgrounds. And when it comes to labor trafficking, it's true that most victims are foreign born from elsewhere. But in your experience, isn't that the case that sex trafficking victims are from our own community?
Absolutely, absolutely. In my case, there were so many kids in my middle school that were being recruited, and we were taken from the North Miami Beach area where you and I grew up in North Miami, taken to Broward County to a brothel. And a brothel is an apartment or a house, or what they call a trap house, that's used for sex trafficking. Now, signs to look for: if you see older men coming in and out at all hours of the night, or you see kids dressed inappropriately for their age or for the weather, that's something to keep an eye out for. And you can report it anonymously. So if you see something, like Dave said, say something. I will tell you this, though, to our family and friends and community in Israel. I've worked with people who are in Israel, and unfortunately, there is a chain that goes through Israel from the Eastern European bloc that traffic women to bring them overseas to meet the demand for sex trafficking. So it does happen in Israel, it happens here, and it happens everywhere. Why? Why does this happen? Because there is a vulnerable population and there is opportunists. There are opportunists out there looking to make money by exploiting others instead of working a regular job like Dave, right? They go out there and they use other people to get. So I think, Dave, it would be great if you gave a breakdown on what exactly does trafficking, what does that mean to be trafficked? Can you give an example of some of the cases you've seen in Palm Beach, like how prevalent that is, and what did it look like?
Well, it depends on whether the victim is a minor or an adult. If it's an adult, you have to have someone who had force, fraud, or coercion. So there has to be one of those elements, and then they've got to be put into a life of sex or labor, and the individual who is, harboring or transporting or in any way enabling it could be charged with human trafficking. If it's a child, a minor, then you don't need those elements, as we said. And so the law is very broad. But here's one way we are able to use these very tough laws in the books against adults who put children into their world of drug dealing. So we have seen, for example, where you have drug dealers who hire kids to sell drugs for them. And they are out there on the streets because the thinking is that, hey, they're kids. Even if they get caught, they're going to be in the juvenile program and get a slap on the wrist. So they thought they had the perfect crime until we charged the adults with labor trafficking. And so those folks, those defendants now face first-degree felony charges where they're facing 30 years in prison. And that's a new and innovative use of a very powerful statute. So that's the example.
I love it.
Now, getting back to my other question, though, Dr. Kat, tell us all, what can the state do differently? And can you tell the Jewish community, tell us, as we believe in tikkun ulam, in healing the world. Tell us how we, as members of the Jewish community of South Florida and Palm Beach County in particular, can help with this situation. What can we do? So tell us from the state level and from the individual level what we can do.
Sure. Thank you, Dave. And first of all, thank you so much for creating that law. And I know Lori Berman's on the call. Thank you for what you do to create that law. So powerful and dynamic. You know, Florida really is the leader in this fight against trafficking. And so just kudos to you for doing that. And thank you for bringing that up. Because when I do talks in public schools, so this is to answer your next question, what can the state do? When I do talks in the public schools, kids sometimes get trafficking mixed up with drug trafficking. So I think it's so important to identify in the laws how we can bring these two together, as you're doing with the labor trafficking, because for kids to identify that they're being trafficked sexually, you've got to name sexual acts, you've got to name specific elements, which makes it very uncomfortable. I think that means we're doing something right because it's about to come down. Let's say this. Kids need to have a clearer understanding when we bring the education to the forefront. We must have survivors and survivor leaders involved in the education and the training that the schools are going to be implementing in the school system. I can't tell you how many children, actually I can, 300 children came to talk to me. And it's not a joke because it's very sad. If out of 300 children, 19 of them were confirmed cases of trafficking, that means over 1 million children are being trafficked annually right now in our school system throughout the United States, because I took the Department of Education statistics and presented that to HHS in Washington in 2018. But what we can do as a state is break it down and make it very simple for kids to understand what does trafficking look like. And using what you just talked about, Dave, which again, I'm so proud of you for that, the drug trafficking, the use of minors for drug dealing could be a form of labor trafficking, absolutely. And how it intersects with sex trafficking, because we know that those overlap, they always intersect, as does domestic violence. So we've got to train people on what to look for.
Actually, that's a good point. Dr. Kapp brought up the fact that domestic violence and human trafficking are often intertwined. During the pandemic, we have noticed that crime is on the decrease. People are locked down and crime is down, but there are two areas where there's an increase. One is car burglaries. For obvious reasons, you're stuck in your home and the car is sitting out there often unlocked. Lock your car doors, everyone. And the second thing is domestic violence. That also makes sense because you have people locked down and liquor stores are still open as essential businesses. And so we saw an increase in domestic violence. But there is a tie between domestic violence and human trafficking. Human traffickers will target victims of domestic violence. These are often, mostly women, not all, but mostly in vulnerable states who may be lured away more easily than others because that they're at the lowest stages of their lives. They're susceptible to a trafficker. And so I think that's why those issues go hand in hand. So knowing that, what can we do, Dr. Kat, in our community to, aside from the state, what can individuals do on this Zoom meeting to make a difference when it comes to human trafficking?
Yeah, my heart is breaking right now for all of the victims of domestic violence who are stuck at home. I'm so glad that you brought that up because I've been on a few national calls, and as it turns out, of course, sexual abuse of minors is on the rise as well. Domestic violence, anywhere there's a closed space where the controller, the abuser has access to their victims and a release, they take it out on the wrong person. And so I've seen that across the country also, and it really hurts my heart that that is happening. So going back to the Jewish community and how you can get involved, number one, be a safe person, be a safe family, attend Rabbi Jessica's temple, Temple Bethel. Go to your local synagogue and attend classes. Speak to the rabbi. If you have problems, everybody's got problems, but if you don't deal with them, they're going to come out in ways that you do not want. And trust me, There are people out there just waiting for your family to fall apart, waiting for you to pick up a drinking addiction or some other addiction so you're not watching, so that you're distracted. And I implore you, please, I beg you, parents, get involved with your children's lives. Love them, show them compassion, show them the truth of what a true father figure looks like, what a true man looks like Dave Aronberg, a true hero, instead of allowing them to be tricked by those exploiters out there. So thank you, Dave. That was a great question.
So what you're saying, Dr. Kat, is that the best thing that our community can do is to learn about it, to know the telltale signs, to engage in better education on what human trafficking is and what it is not. I guess the education component in the new law is a big plus. But when you say educate, are you saying like more meetings like this, more discussions and dialogues like this? Is there anything I'm missing on that? Because I want us to make a difference. I want us to have a takeaway from this meeting, something that we could do to really help this situation.
Right. So first of all, bringing awareness. So the synagogues need to bring awareness. As you know, Rabbi Jessica, sorry to pick on you so much, she's been doing that for years. You know, all of the synagogues need to. This Jewish Federation is doing it, has been doing it. I think all of the community JCCs must have an awareness, something that they are willing to oppose, something, a flyer, PTA meeting. The schools need to have PTA handouts. We need to be putting stuff on social media. Parents, what to look for if your child is being trafficked. And I will give you just some quick tips. If you are receiving Amazon packages at home that you yourself did not buy for your child, it's been reported through Homeland Security that traffickers are recruiting kids through the gaming system and then sending them cameras through Amazon, and your child might say, oh, I got this for free. No, nothing in this life is free. Hello, right? Okay, so you got to get engaged and find out where did that come from, because they're exploiting children in their own home right under their parents' noses through these gaming systems, hooking up cameras, doing sexual acts with siblings and friends, and it is exploitation because then it's child porn. So parents, get involved, get involved. I can't say that enough. Know your child's social media. You know, I know you don't want to be intrusive. I know you want to protect the relationship, and that's very important, but you've got to sit down and have that talk, right? Talk to them about what an unsafe person is. And today we're offering stolen. If you buy one copy on our website, thereishopeforme.org, I'm going to send you two, because I want you to have one and I want you to give one to your child, okay? Or a child that you know. So just for this Zoom for the Federation, we're doing two. Buy one and get two. Or you can buy one and donate one to a survivor. But educate your child. This book is written at an 8th grade level for that reason, because I was 13 when I first got recruited. Now you know, as William Wilberforce said, you can never again say you didn't know. Sorry, but not sorry. Thank you for asking.
And Dr. Kat, one thing that we can do as a community, I think, is to make sure that our state laws are being enforced. Do you know there's also a state law that says that human trafficking public awareness signs must be posted conspicuously when you're at a rest stop? So for everyone who's driven on the turnpike, I would hope that you have seen the human trafficking awareness signs in the rest stops. It should be in the men's room, the ladies' room. And if you have been to those places and haven't seen it, you should ask whoever's in charge, where are the signs? Because the law says that there are many places in Florida that have to have these signs posted, because that's where victims will be. They will be in our airports. They have to have signs posted. Where are they? Yeah. They have to be in every turnpike service plaza, rest area, way station. So if you're a trucker, they got to be at truck stops. They got to be in every rail station. If you're on Amtrak, they've got to be in every welcome center that's open to the public throughout Florida. They've got to be in every business that offers a massage that's not owned by a healthcare practitioner. So those are those shady massage parlors in the strip club. So no one on this call, I'm sure, would ever be in any of those establishments. But all of those places must have conspicuous signs that give a phone number of where to report human trafficking, and the signs that tell you what is human trafficking, so that a victim will say, is this happening to you? Are you being held against your will? Is there forced fraud or coercion? Do you feel that you're being exploited? Here's a phone number where you can get help. We can help you stay in the country. I mean, these signs can be very valuable, but they're not valuable if they're not posted. So Dr. Kat, I don't know, in your experience, have you seen these signs out there? Because the law doesn't work if it's not actually being utilized.
Yes, I have. So you guys are doing a great job. Again, Lori Berman and everyone out there.
And Dr. Kat, I gotta step in. I appreciate you giving me all that credit, but that's not us. That's the laws were established in Tallahassee, and it's up to all of us to ensure compliance with it. So please continue. And I just want to clear that up.
So, giving a shout out also to Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, Lois Frankel, Ted Deutsch. These have been champions as well. And I know I sat in on Debbie's roundtable right before the pandemic. And she's putting a new law out that hotels are going to be required to put the signs. So we know hotels are used for trafficking. There are homes, which of course is the brothel, and there are hotels which are frequented and used for trafficking. So let's contact our lawmakers to make sure that law is put forward. But I think it's very important what you said, Dave, just making sure that the laws are being implemented. I know the strip clubs have given a little pushback, but organized crime is not going to be happy that we're muscling in on their business, right? Because this is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Well, what would you say to all of us out there on how to identify a victim? I mentioned an example of the girl in school who has a new older boyfriend, has expensive jewelry, and has his name tattooed on her eyelids. We've also seen cases of barcodes on a victim's neck, an actual barcode, so she can be scanned so the perpetrator will know where she is at all times. And so what would you say is a good tip for people, like, for example, when they go to their dry cleaner or nail salon or any establishment, what's a good telltale sign to know where human trafficking exists?
I think you gave some very strong points about the worker who won't look you in the eye, who seems like they're abused, and this goes for children too. One of the other tips, that Homeland Security, being part of their task force in South Florida, has taught us is that if you go into an establishment, even for nails, and you see beds in the back for sleeping and refrigerator, cooking utensil, that is a trafficking location. You're going there to get your nails done, go to the bathroom and check it out. Because if you see one of those, then that means those people are living there. But sometimes they're not always living there. Like we saw the case with the 50 Filipinos in Palm Beach that were working at the Boca Resort, and for 2 years were never getting paid. That was labor trafficking. And they were living in a Boca neighborhood, and it was one person on top of another, and it was only a resident that reported. So the other important thing is you all, the community, you guys are the ones that bring this to the forefront. So if you see something suspicious, number one, trust your gut. Trust your gut. If you see something, say something. It's better to report it and be wrong than not report it and be sorry. The other thing that I'll say is our state lawmakers are doing a great job, you on the statewide task force, but we've got to do more in reaching the actual survivors, because as survivors, we don't self-identify. Number one, there's shame involved. My mom always told me prostitution is bad. So I would deny ever being involved in prostitution. I still don't like that word. I will never, ever say voluntarily that I was a prostitute. I don't like it. It's an ugly word. So if you say somebody has been a victim, if you say that's also disempowering. But instead, if you say that this is called exploitation, and you put the onus, like our ambassador, John Richmond, now for the US for trafficking persons, he talks about this really well. He says, put the onus upon the perpetrator where it belongs. So we're talking about traffickers, explaining to children who traffickers are, what is exploitation, helping them to self-realize. Self-realization is a big one. I created a trafficking wheel and an assessment tool, and I share it with kids when I talk in the schools. And let me tell you, the light bulbs go off. We go over it. What does it mean? I give a few examples. I share my story at a very basic, general level, very gentle. And then children come forward, and we work with the FBI and local law enforcement to make sure that that child is safe and traffickers are put away. But thankfully today we have this law. So let's hope that once this information is put out there, there is a safety net, Dave, to catch all of the children that are going to come forward, because that's the one thing I am very worried about. We're a model for the country by having this very important law. So we've got to have the tools in place.
Boy, that's some storm near you. I'm sorry that the connection isn't so great right now. Hopefully that'll pass. But Dr. Kat, two final questions for you, and then I'll turn it back over to the team. First, can you go into just a little bit your story about how you broke away from this life? What was the key, do you think, to saving yourself from continued years in modern day slavery? And then the second question would be, do you have any recommendations for things we can watch? I have a recommendation for a show that really will show you what goes on in sex trafficking. I'm going to say at the end, I want to hear your recommendations of, for people if they want to see something out there and learn to see what's, some accurate films that people could watch, or books that you recommend that they read besides your own book, of course. So if you can answer those two questions, tell us a little bit how you broke away, what the key was, and then give us a recommendation before we bring it home.
Thank you, Dave. So I'll just finish with this. For me, I really believe the self-actualization was key. So picture yourself 16 years old. I had actually 15. I had gotten away from the traffickers in my third trafficking experience in my apartment building. That was the time I told my mom, again, you'll have to read Stolen to get the full picture. But they didn't give up on me. They kept coming after me, because once you're engaged, they feel like they own you. And they came looking for me. So I went to the trafficker's new location, and I thought, maybe I can just resolve things and they can leave me alone. But when I saw this 70-year-old man having sex with my 15-year-old friend, I don't think I've shared this before. So that is an excellent question, Dave. I don't think I've been asked that before. When I saw it for myself, and now I had my own car at this time. I had gotten away from all of these dangerous people, gotten off drugs. My mom, showed me love again. And, for what she knew, because I, of course, didn't know everything at that age. But when I saw it for myself, I was like, oh my gosh, that is disgusting. Where is your mom? Why are you here? My mom gave up on me because I was too much to handle. Parents, don't give up on your kids. For God's sake, please don't give up on your children. Because if you do, somebody else will fill that spot. The other thing is, today, you guys have worse things to worry about. Instagram famous is not all that it's cracked up to be. We've seen traffickers in LA use Instagram famous. They can buy followers to recruit children and make them think that they're true friends on social media. And being in the pandemic, being cooped up at home, not in school with their friends, they're buying into the lies because they're lonely. They want to be socializing. That's how we're made. But Instagram famous is not all that it's cracked up to be. So I hope I've answered your question, Dave. I'll let you finish it off from there. And thank you guys.
Well, would you say then it was that it's what you saw? You saw a friend of yours having sex with a stranger. That really shocked your conscience, but also was that your family did not give up on you, right? Would you say those are the two things? You saw it, so you had to come to the understanding yourself that this is something that you didn't want to be part of anymore, but also your family stayed true to you. And even though they weren't aware of this, but they stayed engaged, and that led you to make the decision. So there wasn't any like white knight that came out and saved you from this. This was something you had to do on your own.
I love how you put that, because with our nonprofit, HOPE, it stands for healing opportunity, purpose, and empowerment. And it's so important to empower survivors to find their voice. Exactly like you're doing right now, okay? That's what I'm doing. And that's how you get them also to cooperate with law enforcement, because you don't make it about them being the bad guy, doing the bad thing. You know, what happened to them was a crime. What happened to us was a victimization. But if you call someone a victim, you're disempowering them. If you call them a survivor or an overcomer or a thriver, they're more likely to identify with that. And for male survivors, they like to be called conquerors, which is a new one. I've been working with some male survivors. They love this, that they're a conqueror. We don't want to disempower anybody. So we want to empower them to find their own voice by giving them the tools to identify what's missing, what's happened to them, and how to get out of it. And then showing them the way. And like Rabbi Jessica says, I have been called a Moses, as David is, you know, for many years, being that example. And here, let me show you the way out. That's what we do.
That's interesting because, you know, not everyone has families who are engaged in their lives. And so they do need someone, some adult figure to help and to step in. I guess every case is different. You did it on your own with the help of your family, but really you were the self-starter, but others may need that white knight to come in and help them. And that's where our community can come in. But it's key that we don't try to dehumanize them or use terms like, hey, you're just a victim, you're a survivor. You've got to sort of empower them in that sense. Because I've seen in our
experience, give them hope.
What is that?
And give them hope. It doesn't end here. I went from my GED to PhD to now JD. Absolutely. If there's hope for me, there's hope for anybody. I'm not special. We can all do it, right? I mean, we need you guys because we can't do it alone. And I needed my mom. And thank God, you know, God was there for me. But I don't feel like kids today have as much to overcome. Look at Rabbi Jessica, what she's talking about, those beautiful words, the welcoming that I felt at the temple. You know, kids have support today. We didn't have that back then. I didn't even go to counseling until later. Sorry, but there is resources available.
No, you're right. You're right. When I was in school, in public school, there was no such thing as a guidance counselor. That started at some point. At some time in my youth, they started with that, but there was a lack of support for people going through such trauma for a while. Nowadays, we have a lot more support, but yet we have a lot more predators because of the internet. They come right into your home now, whereas before, you know, they're under a bridge somewhere. Now they're inside your house and they can get you on your phones. And so we need to understand the new challenges out there. Like you said, Instagram may make everything look so glamorous, but it's not really. I'm glad you talked about that, the fact that you need to make sure these victims, these survivors feel empowered, because we've experienced that some of them, when we approach them, will push back and say no and be angry and aggressive and try to make you feel like they're in total control and they don't want your help. But that also is a sign. That is a telltale sign that something's wrong there, obviously. So just as the last thing, this is our last thing, the last part of my question, if you have any recommendations, because I'm going to give a recommendation. It's going to be a Netflix show that sounds the opposite of what it is. It's called Hot Girls Wanted. I'm sure you've seen it. It was produced by Rashida Jones. It shows the life of young girls who were just innocently brought down to South Beach, Miami Beach, for like glamour and movies, and then they're sent into the sex trade, and it really shows how awful it is and how these girls were not chained down. They were always free to go, and yet it was very hard for many of them to leave. It's called Hot Girls Wanted. It's on Netflix. It is not adult entertainment. It is a hard-hitting documentary that really shows you the life. Do you have anything as a last word, Dr. Kathy, you recommend people read or watch other than your own book?
Yes, of course, Stolen. Remember, we're giving 2 copies to you. Those of you part of the Federation, go on our website, there'shopeforme.org. One for you, one to give to a child you know or your child, and have the discussion. Next, I would say, for the men that are on here, please don't participate in commercial sex. If you go to the Super Bowl, I'm just going to put it out there, demand, if we can get demand, we're going to stop trafficking tomorrow, okay? Pornography, strip club, everything you talked about, Dave. We need to have men rise up and be that voice, be the father figure, but also for Super Bowl that's coming up, there's such a thing called Stripper Bowl that happens at the same time, where there were 300 girls stranded in January. And I worked with the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office on this and the Super Bowl committee as their keynote speaker. We need to have more done for next year. Just an FYI, sorry, I had to put that plug. So you might want to put that on your calendar, Dave. And any men that are watching, if you can do something about sharing the knowledge you've learned today, so that you know not every sporting event is what it's cracked up to be. Behind the scenes, when there's a large sporting event, trafficking increases, kids get recruited. I went to 5 schools in January and helped rescue kids in the process of being recruited for trafficking for Super Bowl. So it's very important, bring awareness. Number one, bring awareness. Talk to your kids, read books, talk to your rabbi, get involved, get counseling on domestic violence, get away from abusive relationships, take a season, get yourself well, get yourself strong, build your kids up. And there's a movie called Tricked that's on Netflix. I think it's also a very good movie, Girls Like Us, which is out of New York. But I think we should do a movie here of what Miami is doing with Super Bowl, Stripper Bowl, and everything underground. Remember, this is a crime that's hidden beneath the surface. So today you brought it to the light. And I thank you, Jewish Federation, Rabbi Jessica, David Aronberg, and all of your watchers.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Kat, and thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back to Matt.
Yep.
And thank you, everyone, for listening.
So let me just say, on behalf of the Federation and our board, the Jewish Community Relations Council, all of our leadership, thank you to Dave and to Kat, and your story, and your incredible story is terrific. We couldn't have done this without you. This is part of the role that we see ourselves in at Federation these days, that today society's problems are Jewish value problems, and whether we're talking about human slavery or human sex trafficking, or frankly, we're talking about the drug problem that Dave Aronberg's been so engaged in with the pill mills. We find it a role for us to be advocates and educators and teachers about these issues, and the role that the Jewish community needs to play. In our Jewish Community Relations Council, under Marissa Trowbridge as director and Elaine Paul as our chair, are going to continue to keep these events and functions happening. And so we really thank you guys for taking the time today. I saw State Senator Lori Berman on the call as well. Thank you for all the efforts she makes at Tallahassee. It couldn't happen without our legislative team. And really, to everybody, thank you very much. Think about your federation as we do 30 days to the end of our campaign. We want to see all of you at the next briefing whenever we can. I'll turn it back over to you, Marissa or Elaine. And other than that, everybody have a great afternoon.
Hello.
Let's just say thank you and good night, and thank you so much for joining us. This was really meaningful, and we're just so happy that you guys took the time to be with us tonight.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Marissa.
Thanks, Elaine.
Thank you, Dr. Kat. Thank you, Dave Aronberg. Thank you, Matt. Rabbi Jessica, mates, thank you very much. And to the Federation staff behind the scenes, thank you.
Thank you. Don't forget to get your copy. We love you.
Good night.
Night.
Small.